Hello, Poem with Purpose is going live today with Free to Feed. We're going to talk all about food reactivity, food allergies. If you are struggling or having concerns about your baby, new baby, anywhere 0 to 5, we are going to talk all things allergies and all the things. So I'm going to get Free to Feed on to talk all about it. They have an active study going on right now through the end of the year that they want to get more people involved, especially the BIPOC community, women of color, to really enter this so our babies can be represented as well. So I'm going to get them on right now and we're going to talk all about it. Let's see about inviting. Let's see. Thank you all for joining. We're going to get Free to Feed over here right now. I've been waiting for this live. I've been absolutely waiting. Dr. Trill is coming on right now to talk all things. Hello.
Hello. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you so very much for having me on today. I'm so incredibly excited to answer these questions and deep dive with you.
Same here. So I would love for you to introduce yourself to the Poem with Purpose community. This live is going to be saved. I want it on my platform as a permanent staple. So if there's food reactivity or anything like that, we can jump right in and I can send them straight to this live and over to Free to Feed.
That is perfect. That is perfect. I'm super excited. A little bit about Free to Feed and what it is that we're doing. I am a molecular biologist by trade. I have a PhD in cellular molecular biology, and I am the mommy to 2 little kiddos who had severe reactions to proteins transferred from my diet to my breast milk. And so for them, that looked like bloody stools, vomiting, eczema responses. And it wasn't until my second daughter was born that I kind of like popped my head out of the sand and was like, okay, where's the research and the resources and the help to navigate this? And what I found were lots of other families and very little by way of like really great research and really great resources. And so that was when I started Free to Feed about 5 years ago, and my youngest is now 5. To do exactly that, to provide the research that families need and are asking for, to provide the products and the resources and the services and education, really, which is what, a lot of families say over and over is, I wish that somebody would just sit down and explain to me what's going on in my body and baby's body. And that's exactly what we do.
So tell me a little bit, like I need like the like those books for like just quick, simple, like it gets. I had a family today and they were talking about cow protein milk. It's just, can you just give like a simple rundown of like those high level terms, so if someone is listening to this, they can get like those, are there 5 like major components of allergies or food react, like something that, because it gets so, because I saw the FPIES and then I saw the FPIAS and I get lost in the sauce.
It's a lot. It's an alphabet soup for sure. And so the best way to think about this is that there's really 2 categories, and that's what's most important. And so the first category of food allergy is what we think of like stereotypically as a food allergy, right? When we think of a food allergy, we think of like a little kid having a peanut, going into anaphylactic shock and needing an EpiPen in their thigh and going to the hospital, right? Like stereotypically, that's what we think of. That type of food allergy is called an IgE mediated food allergies. And that's an acronym for immunoglobulin E, but we could just call it IgE mediated food allergy. And it's simply listed that because that's the pathway in the body in which the response is elicited. And so the IgEs is what sees the food and says, this is something that's bad. This is a thing that I'm going to elicit a response to. And then everything else falls into the non-IgE mediated bucket. And so that's where you get into that alphabet soup that you mentioned. We have allergic procticulitis, we have FPIES, there's dysmobility, and all of those other things. Everything else fits into the non-IgE mediated category. What's important to note, though, is that regardless as to like which category you fit into in the non-IgE mediated world, almost all of the time, your next course of action is going to be the same. And so that's why like being able to differentiate those 2 big categories is it IgE or is it non-IgE is the top thing that we need to do. And we can talk about the symptoms of like what's one versus the other. And then the rest is like, it's nice, right? It's nice to know maybe exactly what set of alphabet letters your baby is specifically. But as far as it relates to, unfortunately, one diagnosis, there isn't a hard diagnosis for those non-IgE mediated food allergies because the tests that we have available specifically look for IgEs. So they're not really helpful for the rest of us. And the good news in that is if you fall into that realm of non-IgE, it's highly likely that your kiddo's going to outgrow it, which is wonderful.
Perfect. So can we talk about, I want to give kind of like quick, like deep dive. So if someone's coming in and want to listen to all the other stuff, like, can you just jump right in on like how Free to Feed can help families? Like, I just want to have that all up front. So if someone needs to listen to the rest of the, you know, but I want to like, because it gets confused. Like I'm already confused. I'm not even going, you know, EpiPen and like food allergies is one side and everything else kind of falls on the other side. So can you talk about Free to Feed, what your consultants and your professionals do so like people can know like how can I get help? Because whatever side of the coin that you're on, we just need to give these families help. Like it doesn't matter. I remember this couple weeks ago, my son broke out with my youngest broke out with a rash all over his body, upper, and I was like freaking out. We're taking him for allergy testing on Thursday because he's never been allergy tested before. He ended up having strep, right? Fine. But like that scare of like, oh my gosh, I'm giving him Benadryl. And I'm like, you know, and my first son, had a slight allergy to egg, like, but he could still eat eggs. Like, I just want families to understand like what you do, how you help them, how to, you know, what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what Free to Feed offers today is one-on-one consultation services and education. And so we have a team of providers who are everything from registered dietitians, lactation consultants, IBCLCs. We have a pediatrician, we have registered nurses, a pediatric nurse practitioner, all on our team that work one-on-one with families virtually, globally. So these are educational products or services where we can work with one-on-one with you through Zoom and deep dive into your baby's particular symptoms and then how we can help you reach your feeding goals. And so the nuanced space that I work in and the research focus that I have is particularly how things can transfer from our diet to our breast and elicit these allergic responses in our kiddos. And so all of these providers are food allergy families themselves. So they've navigated this themselves as well. And they have all of the training that from our research and other peer-reviewed studies to help support families to give them the science that they need in order to make educated decisions.
So where do they start? Like if you're like, oh my gosh, I think this, like, how do they know if they need to talk to the RD, the LC, the IBCLC, the pediatrician? Is there like a room that, like an area that they start in? Like, how does that work to like figure out where they need to navigate within Free to Feed?
Yeah, so typically the first step is confirming that like the symptoms that you're dealing with is likely food reactivity, because we absolutely don't want anybody to remove any food from their diet unless they absolutely have to. Like if you can eat cheese, please eat all the cheese. And so first steps is to talk about the symptomology. And so we offer free training on symptoms. We have a free quiz on our homepage that allows you to click off on all of the symptoms you may be experiencing. And it can also be helpful just to see what questions are in that quiz too. Like, oh, I didn't realize that that could be a symptom like chronic congestion. And then we send you a series of emails that talks you through like, yep, this is the next step for you, and this is how we can help. And then our team works together. And so what that means is like, let's say you start out with an IBCLC and you get to a point of like, all right, now we've figured out exactly what my baby's reactive to. Fabulous, wonderful. Now, how do I make sure that my diet's sustainable long-term, right? Because now I'm removing X, Y, and Z from my diet, but I'm worried that I don't have enough calcium in my life. Then we are going to the registered dietitian and we're making sure your diet is sustainable long-term.
So that's for, I get it, breastfeeding. Like, do you assist? Like, is there combo feeding? If they're only formula feeding, like, how does that look in Free to Feed as well?
Yeah, so we do up to 5 years old with all feeding modalities. So combo, formula, and starting solids, because there's every combination of food reactivity feeding journey. And very often when we're experiencing symptoms when kiddos are really young through formula or through the breast, oftentimes then it can be really stressful to start solids.
Okay. Now I love it. I love it. So literally it doesn't matter if someone's on breast milk, formula, or solids, free to feed can assist really up from 0 to 5 years of age. So I just want to get all that in there as well. So I don't, I submitted some questions because I got some questions from the community. So is there a difference between food reactivity and food allergies? And if it's all kind of the same thing, like this space can be so confusing. And as someone as the person's already dealing with a potential event that's taking place, like trying to know where to start of like what to do. And I love that the quiz was there. I sent it to one of my doula clients because she was having issues. And so I can attest to like now knowing that the quiz is amazing and really can help. But is there a difference? Is there a difference between the two?
Yeah, sometimes the terminology can be very confusing. And a big part of the confusing portion of the terminology is that non-IgE mediated food allergy part that we just got done talking about didn't actually get diagnostic codes until 2017. So that has a huge part to deal with like the confusing portions when we're talking to different people and they may use different terminology, right? So what's important to note is that when I use the word reactivity, it is all encompassing. It is, yes, everything. Any kind of reaction to a food is reactivity. And oftentimes I use that terminology because most of what we see when parents reach us is they don't know yet about IgE versus non-IgE. And so if I continue to say like, yeah, your baby has the non-IgE mediated food allergy, it may not like reach them properly because they have probably been told that their baby has a food intolerance, which is not what their baby has. Or they are in the space of like, no, my baby doesn't have a food allergy because they don't need an EpiPen, or they tested negative. And so I use the term reactivity to all encompass everybody, but an allergy is really what they're all experiencing.
Got it. Yeah. So I want to ask a real question here, and it's not even on the sheet that I submitted, but how is free to feed different from other places and spaces? And what I mean is if someone goes to their outside allergist, or someone goes to a pediatrician, or if someone goes to a registered dietitian, because it's second opinions are great and like all of the things. So how does free to feed differentiate themselves from all the other, because it's you really get lost in the sauce of like who is helping, even in lactation or any other field, like you got to find your jam, you got to find your people, but like what is I know you're trying to lead the way and like your own personal experiences, your whole team has food, like it's just a different level of like what you're doing. And I don't even need to be a part of that to know like you're here every single day. You out here. We're not even talking about the personal side, the military and all the things, amazing things that you do, and you still find time to do this. So regardless, it sets you apart. But I want people to understand like where you fall in to be a differentiating factor with, sometimes like, let's say kids have tongue ties. Next thing you send to SLP, send to a chiropractor, send to a lactation. You send to all these people. So allergies, you got RDs, all the things. Like what do you find as being your differentiating factor? And you've won plenty of awards and like, so what's that story?
Yeah. The differentiating factor, I think, is twofold. One, the fact that I've personally experienced this and we are leading the charge in the research space. And like that's my number one focus and goal is how do we improve research? How do we massively expand really like lactation research period, because it is lackluster, and that's the like kindest way that I can put that. And so that's one. And so my background and then my experience. And then the second like layer to that is specifically what sets us apart from, the providers that you can see. Yes, 100% second, third, fourth opinions if you have the access to that, is that we are specialized very specifically in the nuance between the parent's body and the baby's body and really early food reactivity. And so, yes, 100%. When we go to an allergist, that can be very helpful. If baby is experiencing IgE-mediated food allergies, because the allergist can give you a test. However, most allergists won't even see you until your baby is at least 6 months old, if not much older. And so then what do we do? Like in my example with my baby, when she was only 3 weeks old, we weren't told we could even see an allergist. That wasn't even an option. We were told we could go see a GI doctor. And many times when you go see the GI doctor, you're told, yeah, things that you transfer can't end up in the breast, or things that you transfer are in the breast for weeks on end. And you're like, why are we in two completely different spectrums here? And so we take all of that and we say, okay, this is what's happening in mom's body or the lactating parent's body. This is what's happening in baby's body. This is how these two things play together, and that both are equally important, and to navigate that with them. And there is no really good space that does that for food allergies. We ping pong, right? We go from the pediatrician to the GI doctor. The GI doctor says, this is an allergy. You go to the allergist says, this isn't the type of allergy I help with. And you go back to the pediatrician. And it's a whole lot of ping ponging.
I love it. So let's just jump right into signs that your child is even having an allergic reaction. Like, what do they look for? What do they just keep on the forefront of, like, if this is happening, this is important?
Yep. So first, on the IgE-mediated side, we're going to stick with these categories. On the IgE-mediated side of food allergies, most often what we'll see is swelling, hives, any kind of breath like obstruction, or heart issues where like the pulse is through the roof, similar to anything like that. What's interesting is that IgE-mediated responses can cause what's called anaphylactic shock. And so what's important to note that many people don't is that anaphylactic shock technically doesn't just mean like I need an EpiPen. Anaphylactic shock is categorized as a failure in one critical body part, so meaning like your breathing or your heart is critical, or a reaction in two non-critical areas. And so an example of that would be like vomiting and hives, right? Like it's not going to cause necessarily you to pass, but it is still two areas. So that's what's categorized as anaphylactic shock. So those are the things you're looking for as it relates to like the really emergent food reactivity problems. What's fascinating is that when we're lactating, our body dramatically reduces the size of the proteins that we are consuming. So we consume a peanut, we break it down to a very small fragment of itself, which means that we don't see anaphylactic shock through the breast, which is so fascinating. And instead, for IgE-mediated responses, more often what we see is sometimes we'll see hives and sometimes swelling, but most often we will see an eczema response. So like the red, angry, flaky, things like that that we'll see through the breast that we'll find later is an IgE-mediated response. Not always, but many times. So on the other side, the other category, and where a vast majority of families will land in the non-IgE-mediated space, we have skin reactions. So that can be a rash, any kind of eczema response. And important to note that eczema response is essentially like the catch-all phrase for lots of different rashes. So any kind of eczema response, rashes. And then when you get into the GI system, you can have upper GI or lower GI reactivity. The upper GI reactivity that we'll see is chronic congestion. We'll see reflux, vomiting, and stomach pain and issues there. When we get into the lower GI, we can see diarrhea, excessive mucus in stool, bloody stool, constipation. And then the other thing that's important to note is that all of those symptoms we just mentioned can have secondary problems, right? So if you imagine my baby is vomiting every time that we feed, then she's probably going to have weight gain problems, or she's not going to sleep well. If we have silent reflex issues, like we are not sleeping, experience that firsthand. We may have feeding aversions, right? So like my youngest had FPIES, which you kind of alluded to. My youngest had FPIES where she vomited, and she would have feeding aversions. She would arc her back and pop off the breast and be upset. And that was like how her reactions presented. So when we're thinking about these non-IgE-mediated responses, there's a lot there, and most certainly as somebody who's working in the lactation space, you can relate to like, yeah, a lot of those symptoms also can be related to other problems for baby and or the latch and or lactation. So it can be super confusing.
Yes. We received another question that both my husband and I have food allergies. Should I be concerned that my child will also have the same allergies?
That's such a good question. And so yes and no. The unfortunate part and same here, I also have IgE-mediated food allergies, is that we are highly likely to pass down the propensity for food allergies. We are not highly likely to pass down the same foods. So it's very likely that we'll pass down the fact that the immune system will misidentify something that should be benign, like it's not a bad thing, but it thinks it's a bad thing, or we will likely pass that down to our children. But unfortunately, slash fortunately, depending on who you are, it isn't often the same food. It can happen just based on probability. But if you and your husband are both allergic to peanuts, it's more likely that your little one's going to be allergic to something else. Now, that being said, it's not a for sure situation. It's just a higher likelihood, higher probability.
So if someone has food allergies, like what, I know it depends on which one and what, then not all of them need an EpiPen. There's certain things that you carry with you, your diaper, or out. What does that look like for families?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think one thing that's important to note is that with the newer research that we have, there's been this shift away from utilizing Benadryl for those types of reactions because they can induce drowsiness and they're what's called a generation 1, so they're first generation, and we now know that it's better to utilize second and third generation, which is just basically like scientists making something better. And so an example of those would be if you use children's Zyrtec or children's Claritin. Those are better options for you to keep on hand. More often than not, I see Zyrtec used because it's the faster of the two. So I would keep that squirreled away in your diaper bag or just on hand at home in case you did see any kind of reaction and you wanted to give something before you go in. If you do see an IgE-mediated response, that swelling, difficulty breathing, always call an ambulance and make sure that you get seen.
So as far as like, I know if you have antihistamines, which is good to know that they're not even recommended overall potentially, right? Is that the same with allergy testing? If you have Zyrtec or Claritin in your system, you have to wait a certain amount of days as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I just want people to like be very clear, like that's what we did. Like we just went straight to like, oh my gosh, something else is wrong, and we hurried up, and then they're like, oh well, we can't see you for 5 days. I'm like, luckily that wasn't what the issue was, because if it was something serious, we're gonna get ahead of it.
Yep.
Do you recommend, even if a child isn't showing signs, like at a certain point, get allergy tested? What do you recommend there in general?
Yeah, in general, we don't recommend any kind of allergy testing unless there are signs, because oftentimes, unfortunately, these allergy tests are not very accurate. And so to just do like a full panel of, let's say, the top allergens in a test, it's very common that we'll get false positives. And then you'll think, oh, my baby's allergic to peanuts, when in reality they're not. And that can impact whether or not you offer peanuts. And we know now that we want to offer peanuts and we want to offer eggs if they're not reactive to it. And so we don't recommend testing unless we are suspect of those particular types of reactions.
Completely understand. So if a child has food reactivity in some way, what should be their next steps? Like, it's just so many things to consider. Of course, working with Free to Feed, but like, what should be their next steps if they think or suspect? What does that look like?
Yeah, so the next step, if you think or suspect that your baby has food reactivity, if you're experiencing those symptoms that are IgE mediated that we mentioned, the swelling, the hives, things like that, is to see your provider and get in with an allergist. So you can do a test, and that's important to note on that side. If you're experiencing the other symptoms I mentioned, the massively mucousy stool, bloody stool, vomiting, reflux, things of that acquired eczema responses, then the next step is to look at those particular symptoms and determine whether or not it's likely that this could be food related. So are we seeing, and it's always nuanced, and I'm sure you can appreciate this too, is that when we look at an infant and all of this symptomology, if we're experiencing green, slimy stools and no other symptoms at all, food allergies isn't the first thing we're gonna go tackle. Right, we're going to start talking about latch and supply, and we're going to talk and make sure that there's no anatomical issues, all of that fun stuff first, before we say like axe the cheese from your life and your diet. Now, if that family comes to us and says like, yeah, we've got these green mucousy stools and we have this eczema all over baby's body, that's more likely that we're going to say, okay, this is more likely food And sometimes we do both at the same time, where we're like, okay, we're addressing food and we're tackling whether or not food is a part of the puzzle, in addition to working with individuals that can help with like latch and anatomical problems. So next step is to talk to somebody.
So can you order tests, or do you direct families through the process of like, do you order tests, or do you just direct them on like where to go next? Can you interpret tests? Like, can you just give people an idea of that piece?
Yeah, so we can help with test interpretation. We do that very often. And we don't directly order tests, but we can walk you through that process if there's tests to be done. Unfortunately, for a vast majority of the families that we're working with, there isn't a test for what it is that they're experiencing.
You're just treating like you just go through trying to treat the symptoms to make everything better, plan food, like meal plan stuff. I saw someone say in the comments, you're amazing. You help them with their food plan, all of those things. So that is really, really good. So I want to switch gears for a moment to this study that you have. So if you're listening here, Free to Feed reached out to me and they have a study. I don't have children with like major food allergies, but I have a lot of clients that have them. This is my pet peeve, and this is straight up my pet peeve. The moment they think that something is wrong with your baby, they immediately want you to stop breastfeeding, period. Point blank, 22,000 pins in it. It is a very bad way to go. I'm very much like, I don't know all the things and I didn't have to experience it, but I can have sympathy, and I hate that. Like literally, I have families that are like making all this milk and they're like, I got this wrong, so I just gotta stop. And I'm like, there's so many nuances that can be done. Like, of course, it comes with potential sacrifice of like maybe having to remove some things out of our diets and things, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it looks a certain way because all the breakdown by the time it ends up in the milk is not. I'm not the expert, but this is my issue and why I'm helping Free to Feed with this initiative, because we need our baby's breast milk, period. Right? Regardless, if something else is going on, you need care with lactation and making more milk. That's one thing. But we need to feed our babies breast milk. They deserve to have, if we want to, and your baby wants to do so, nursing, pumping, whatever that looks like, returning to work, you need to have the plan to be able to do so. I'm here trying to push this initiative to help Free to Feed do this study. I want her to talk about it, but I also want to implore for, this is what I'm going to say, and I'm going to say it on the record so people get to this part. I'm going to be talking about it in my stories. They need more women of color. They need more BIPOC community to be able to do this. And we need our children included in this. Like a lot of things, there's just only questions. There's no like, you got to get a shot. You got to do this. It's none of that. It's literally making sure that our children are represented in this, because sometimes, I don't know the history and I'll let Dr. Chill talk about that, but sometimes stuff shows up differently in different cultures. We may introduce foods differently. We may go about things differently, and our children deserve to be represented in this study. So it's my personal, because I want us, as long as we want to feed our children in our own way, to be able to do so. So I want you to talk about this study. Please share whatever is important, and we can go from there. We've been talking for about 30 minutes, so I tell people in this thing if they want to skip right to this part first. I just wanted to get out to even start with what does that look like. But if they are experiencing it, this study is going to be groundbreaking, and I just wanted to talk a little.
Yeah, I really, really appreciate that. And so some of the things that I think is really important to mention is, first, the study and the development of the study was to say, what is it that food allergy families need to have published in a peer-reviewed journal in order for them to be able to more effectively communicate with their providers. And so what I mean by that is that oftentimes, and we see this massively as a very large problem for individuals of color, where they are dismissed at much higher rates than the white community, where they go and they say, these are the things I'm experiencing, and they are largely dismissed, and they are often told to stop breastfeeding, when that's not necessarily the case in a vast majority of these cases. And so when we developed this study, it was specifically built to say, okay, what are the things that food allergy families want to communicate with their providers in a way that they could say, like, here's the study, here's the information, and this is how we can communicate with you. And it's parental reported. And so The other piece that has never been done before is that this is the first time that we've ever had a study, parental reported, that looks at timing from when you're consuming something, if you had reactivity through the breast, timing from when you consume something to when you start to see reactivity to when you start to see healing. And that has never been done before. And we are looking at the data from many different lenses. And one of them is from the ethnic backgrounds of these individuals, because it is very likely, even I would say, that individuals who are people of color, who even, and we even know that, we know that like individuals who are of Asian descent, for example, are highly likely to be reactive to dairy. Almost all of them end up having lactose intolerance, like 98%. So we already know that there's a big difference here. And so when we're looking at things like the very first study to look at timing and parental reporting of from when I consumed it to when I saw a reaction, and then being able to parse through individuals and their different backgrounds, this will be the very first time we'll be able to do that. And that's so important, because if women who are Black are transferring faster or slower, we have to know that. We have to know that, because we can't effectively support them in their breastfeeding journey unless we can tell them that and give them that hard data. And a vast majority, all of the research to date that has been done have been really all studies, and they have been all in white women. And that has to change. The other thing that is really important to note as it relates to food allergies specifically is that there is research that has shown that children who are Black have almost 2 times the likelihood of having a food allergy than their white counterparts. And that is egregious. And there's a number of theories about like why that may be, but at the end of the day, they're twice as likely to have food allergy issues, and we have barely any research for them. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge and state that I understand why that's the case. I completely understand why there is less research, and the community is hesitant to participate in this research. I 100% understand that. The pieces that I would mention that you did as well is that there's no intervention here. We're not treating in any way, shape, or form. It's a retroactive survey, which means you tell us about your journey and what you want to tell us about your journey. We don't save any of the information as you go. So if you get partway through the study and you decide, actually, I don't want to do this anymore, you can just close the window and we never know that you were even there, and can never reach out to you or anything of that accord. And it's full IRB approved and will go to peer-reviewed publications. And as we've been navigating this, we launched the study at the beginning of the year. There is a much lower participation rate for individuals who are not white in this study. And that's something that is very, very important to me, that we close that gap.
When is the study done? Like what's the timeline?
Our goal is to close the study at the end of the year, because we were looking at about a year time frame.
Okay. If people have questions, if they are on the fence in any way, how can they reach out? What's the best way if there are concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can either DM me if that makes you most comfortable here on this platform. That is always me. You will always get me in our DMs. Or you can email me directly at trill@freetofeed.com. That will go directly to me. And I'm super happy to answer questions. I'm happy to chat about any questions that you have. And you can see the entirety of the study. If you click into the study, you can see the whole thing in one fell swoop. So there's no surprises as you go.
Is there, so we're gonna close. Do you have any last things that you want to say, recommend? I also, don't want to ignore the fact that your team, including your co-founder, is diverse, right? Because it's so important to be seen, heard, valued, and validated, and also see people that look like you. So I do want to say you have a diverse team, like you're just not doing this, like you truly have a mission and vision, just in general on how you hire, how you do things. That's of inclusivity.
Yes. Yep. That's a great point. My co-founder is a woman of color, our pediatrician. We have in addition to our pediatrician, another woman of color who is provides lactation support and food allergy support. We also provide our services in English, Spanish, and Arabic as well. So we have those capabilities. So also say I appreciate that nod, and I would love to kind of leave everybody with the main takeaway of you absolutely can continue to breastfeed your child in whatever modality makes most sense for you if you have food allergy issues. You absolutely can. We have helped thousands of families do exactly that. I've done that with both of my kiddos. Was it easy? Absolutely not. It was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced, and that's saying a lot coming from me. But it is possible, and anyone who tells you that you cannot is not up to date on the research and the science and deserves like a tiny whop upside the head.
So someone asked the question, is this study open to Canadians? Is this a worldwide study? What's the
Global.
Global. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm speechless. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for recognizing the need for all families to be represented in research. And we have to do our part to understand that when there's a safe space in place for our opinions, our views, what we go through to be recognized and in research in a way that we are safe to do so, or we want to do so. I'm so excited to be able to bring this to the forefront, to be able to talk about this, to hopefully bring more families so our babies can be represented for years to come. So I want to thank you for your time today. I want to thank you for where people, you're so welcome. I want to, where people fall in the food allergy spectrum or in the groups and things, out as a be able to families, and that's more than what a lot of people are doing right now. So I just want to thank you for having, whatever we go through in our lives, that trauma purpose, right? I always say that. So not that, I tell people all the time, what we go through is not sometimes for us to help people for years to come. And just know that we appreciate what you're doing, to stand against to stand against the issues that people have with how you're doing it and all the things, right? I just want to take the time to thank your team for all that you do, because it's not always appreciated by everyone, but what you're doing is going to change the lives for years to come. And I just want to keep pushing, keep going, keep trying to, like, you didn't have to reach out to me. You didn't have to, do those things, but you trying to make the study worthwhile for all races, ethnicities, communities of color, and beyond. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to talk to me. As long as Instagram saved this, fingers and toes crossed, this permanent spot on my timeline, because it has so many gems, so many things for people to look forward to if they ever are experiencing anything dealing with food reactivity. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, bye.